Thanks of the day. This is Professor Preeti Ostwal, and I'm Assistant Professor at Silverbrook University. I'm delighted to welcome all of you to today's lecture. In this particular lecture, I would like to talk about The Monkey's Paw by W. W. Jacobs. Now, The Monkey's Paw, it is a short story. It's a horror short story by W. W. Jacobs. It has paranormal elements and, supernatural elements in the story. So it talks about a white family and their encounter with a mysterious object, which is a monkey paw. And this monkey paw it grants three wishes. Now the story talks about the themes of fate, greed, and the dangers of tampering with the unknown, right? Now, before delving deep into the short story itself, let us first look at the author's bibliography. Now, the author, W. W. Jacobs, he was a British born. He was born in London and in 1863 and died there in 1943. He was known for his short stories and he wrote like dark and, funny stories. He wrote numerous such stories and Monkey's Paw was one of them, which was published in 1902. Now, before delving deeper into the story, let us first see where the story was set. The story was set in White family's home, and the story took place in a modest yet comfortable home that was situated in the quiet suburban street. The home, there were three members in the home. Uh, who consisted of Mr. White, Mrs. White, and their son, Herbert. Now let's look at the synopsis of the story. Now, The Monkey's Paw, it is a very, chilly, gripping, and heavy short story that was written by W. W. Jacobs, as we have already seen. It follows the family of White, and they were a working class household. They were not very rich, they were not very poor, they were the working class people. Now they encounter this mystical and cursed object, which is the monkey's paw, like we have looked in the previous slide. Now, this monkey paw had the ability to grant three wishes. Now, if ever you come across, such a paw, you would be very tempted to, know if actually does it work. So, like the majority of the public, even Mr. White was very tempted to see if it actually worked, that he was curious to see. So it was a tempting opportunity to change their fortunes, But it kind of quickly turned into a nightmare because the White learned that, with time, with wish, as they wished for one thing and the next, they understood that, tampering with this fate had dire and unpredictable consequences. And it was they had to deal with the most terrible consequences in the story. Now, let us see how the story opens. The story opens as a White family consisting of Mr. White and Mrs. White and their adult son, Herbert. Now, they receive an unusual visitor named Sergeant Major Morris, who was a served in the army and he came back from his travels from India and he was sharing his experiences in India and so on. And he shares how he actually got the acquisition of monkey's paw. Now, the monkey's paw was given to him by a fakir, and he told how this monkey paw has the ability to grant wishes, and he himself has used it. And intrigued by this, the whites accept the paw even after Morris many warnings. They really wanted to, check if it actually works or not. So Mr. Paul, he makes his first wish, and from that point in time, the whole chain of events that unfolded afterwards, it went out of control, and they have to face the most terrible consequences. Now, we could see that, their lives were turned upside down and they have to see unforeseen outcomes of their wishes. And every time they were trying to harness the power of monkey's paw, they were met with horrifying results that forced them to confront the limits of their own agency. And they understood like how how what is the danger of interfering with the natural order of the things that are naturally going, how we it could be very dangerous and how the outcome could be terrible and dire when once you start interfering it with it. So the story builds into a very chilling climax, leaving us the readers to think like the power of faith, the value of faith, and how our greed could actually lead to horrifying consequences, like when we meddle with the faith. Now, moving on, let us now start looking at the story in depth. Now, first of all, arrival of the Pope. Now, the Major Morris, he was a retired soldier and he had a very distinguished career. So he visits the White's family and he talks about, how he has served in Army in India, and during dinner he introduces them to mummified monkey's paw, like we could see in the picture here, right? Now he explains how an old fakir had placed a spell on the paw, and so that he could grant her three wishes, but only with hellish consequences. Because it comes like a punishment, to tamper with the faith. So Morris had a horrible experience himself, but Mr. White was very skeptical and curious about it. So he, while Morris throws the point to the fire, he retrieves, because he wanted to know what would happen if he used the paw himself. Now, Mr. White first hesitates, after hearing all the warnings from Morris, but then he also believes that he already have everything that he wants. But at Herbert's suggestion, he finally thinks and he wishes for 200 pounds, which will enable him to make the final mortgage payment, right? So they were the whites, all of them, they were gripped by the allures of the monkey's paw. And so they wanted, because of the curiosity or the desperation, they kind of gather around and they were ready to make their first wish, to ask for 200 pounds. Now, here you can see that the atmosphere, they were like, it was thick with anticipation. They were uncertain, will it actually fulfill that their wish or not? So they were carefully considering their desires, will it actually work or not? So, but what happens is that while they wish for the 200 pounds, Mr. White suddenly drops the paw in surprise because he claims that it moved in his hand and twisted like a snake. So the following day, after they have already wished for 200 pounds, what happens is that Herbert leaves for work, and that night, that evening, an employee from Herbert's company arrives at Whitehall, telling them that Herbert had been killed in a terrible machine accident that has mutilated his body. Like his body is in such a state that it could not even be identified without his clothes. So the company denies any responsibility for the incident, but they declare the intention to make a goodwill payment to the wives, to the bereaved family. So while the despairing couple, they were grieving about their only child's death. They actually get the sum 200 pounds, from the company, and they realize that this was one of the most dire consequences that they have to face. Now, the second wish, son's return. So, a week after funeral, Mrs. White, she was mad with grief. She was so consumed with grief that he desperately wanted, to return. He desperately wanted her son back. So she insisted her husband to use that pot to wish Herbert back to life, and he reluctantly does so. So what happens is despite because he knew that what state his son's body was when he died, he was not sure if he should do that, but he finally actually wished for his son back. And here what happens is that later that night there is a knock on the door, right? So as Mrs. White fumble at the locks and in a desperate attempt to open the door, Mr. White becomes terrified. He was so afraid because, he was so uneasy even at the thought of summoning his son's mutilated and decomposing body that when he hears the knock at the door, he was not very sure if, this is what is happening, right? And he, like, out of fear, he just takes the paw and then finally he makes his third and final wish, and the knocking stops. Basically he does not want his son back anymore because he was so terrified by the thought of his mutilated and decomposing body coming back to the home that he just wished for this third wish from Monkey's paw. and hoping to escape the pain of his death, right? So, at the end, the story ends with that the knocking stops and Mrs. White opens the door to find that no one was there on the street. Now, the conclusion of this story is the power of unforeseen consequences. The monkey's paw is like a cautionary tale for us, like, dangers of wishing for things that is beyond our control. Times before, without thinking, without giving much thought, we wish for things that is beyond our control, beyond our, it is that extends or goes above our limitations. And the White family learns this devastating lesson about the consequences of their action through such events, which was very disastrous. And this highlights the importance of considering the potential downsides before making a wish. Even if you want to make a wish, it is very much important to think it through, to think about the potential downsides, what could happen, what could not happen, everything before wishing. So this story talks about how, because of our greed and so on, how us tampering with the natural order of events could lead to such disastrous consequences. Now, this was it, and I hope you liked this lecture, and I hope this was clear enough to you. Thank you. Um, I'm signing off.